Take had always prized his privacy. Nestled at the edge of the neighborhood, his property stretched wild and untamed, a thin border where manicured lawns gave way to towering pines and dense underbrush. It was his refuge, a place where the city's noise faded and the wilderness whispered its secrets. But this morning, as he pulled into his driveway after a long weekend away, something felt off. Bright colors splashed across his yard. Cheerful picnic blankets, balloons tied to trees, even a makeshift canopy flapping gently in the morning breeze. A dozen or more neighbors laughed and chatted, their voices carrying over the usual morning stillness. A smoky aroma drifted from a grill, mingling oddly with the fresh scent of pine. Jake's chest tightened. This was his land, his sanctuary. No one had asked permission. He stepped out of his truck, eyes narrowing as he surveyed the scene. Children darted between the picnic tables, their carefree squeals clashing with the sharp edge of intrusion. At the edge of the forest, the trees loomed, shadows deepening between the trunks. And then, almost imperceptibly, Jake caught it. A low, guttural growl, barely audible, rising from the thicket. His heart skipped. He scanned the tree line but saw nothing moving. Still, the sound didn't lie. "Hey! What's going on here?" Jake called out, voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of warning. Several heads turned toward him, smiles faltering. "Jake, glad you're back," said Marcy, the HOA president, waving him over. "We thought this would be a great way to bring everyone together. The whole neighborhood's here." Jake's jaw clenched. "On my property?" Marcy shrugged, a little too casually. "Well, it's right next to your backyard, isn't it? No big deal." Jake's gaze flicked back to the woods. The growl echoed again, sharper this time, sending a ripple of unease through his skin. "You know there have been bear sightings around here, right? This close to the forest?" The smile on Marcy's face tightened. Old stories. Nothing to worry about. But Jake wasn't convinced. His instincts screamed otherwise. Over the past few months, he'd spotted large paw prints in the dirt near the fence line. He'd heard the occasional rumble echoing through the trees late at night. The bears were real and hungry. He moved closer to the edge of the gathering, eyes sweeping over the food laid out, grilled meats, sweet pastries, and picnic baskets brimming with fruit. The scent was intoxicating, a beacon for any creature with a keen nose. Suddenly, a child's laugh pierced the air, sharp and high. Jake turned just in time to see a small boy chasing a butterfly near the tree line, feet crunching on dry leaves. The laughter stirred something in the woods, a flicker of movement, shadows bending and twisting. The growl returned, louder now, closer. The atmosphere shifted in an instant. The lightness of the picnic seemed fragile, as if a single thread might snap and unleash chaos. Jake stepped forward, raising his voice to cut through the chatter. "Everyone, listen! You need to move away from the trees, now!" Confused looks met his words. "What? It's just a picnic," Marcy said, trying to keep the mood light. "No, there are bears nearby." His tone left no room for argument. Slowly, unease spread across the faces gathered. Parents grabbed children, murmurs of alarm weaving through the crowd, but some still lingered, unwilling to believe that their pleasant day could turn dangerous. Jake's eyes never left the tree line. The growl sounded again, followed by a sudden crack, a heavy branch snapping under weight. He swallowed hard, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Today was supposed to be quiet, peaceful. Instead, the wilderness was waking up, and the HOA had unknowingly lit a fuse they couldn't control. The memory of that rushed HOA meeting gnawed at Jake as he helped usher neighbors away from the forest's edge. Just a week ago, the board had gathered in the community center, a room humming with forced smiles and whispered arguments. Marcy had pushed hard for the picnic on Jake's property. The perfect spot, she'd said, while others hesitated, murmuring about the recent wildlife warnings. But in the end, enthusiasm won out over caution. Jake remembered raising his hand, voice firm but ignored. There have been reports of bear activity near the backyards here. We shouldn't hold an event so close to the woods. Jake, it's just a picnic, Marcy had said, brushing it off. We're not expecting anything wild. Besides, the risk is minimal. Minimal. The word echoed in his mind as he stood on his land now, watching the neighbors scramble away from the trembling forest line. Even now, he could still feel the low vibrations of the growl, the unmistakable warning of a predator unsettled by the noise and smells. The forest wasn't a playground. It was a living, breathing wilderness, raw and unpredictable. As he scanned the dirt near the tents, Jake's gaze caught on something fresh. Deep paw prints pressed firmly into the soil, nearly trampled by hurried feet. The size alone made his stomach churn. A Grizzlies. The warning signs had been there all along, but the HOA board's eagerness to host the event had blinded them. Suddenly, a sharp snap from the woods drew everyone's attention. The chatter dropped to a hush as the group froze, eyes wide, searching the thick underbrush. Jake felt his pulse race, adrenaline tightening his muscles. The bears were close, closer than anyone realized. "Stay calm," Jake said, voice low, but steady. "Whatever you do, don't run toward the trees. We need to get to the clearing near the road." Marcy looked torn between panic and disbelief, but nodded. "All right." Everyone followed Jake. Slowly. The crowd began moving, some clutching picnic blankets and half-eaten food, others holding their children tightly. The tension was thick, like a gathering storm waiting to break. As they moved, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a random encounter. Something else was at play, something deeper than a simple mistake in planning. He remembered the conversations he'd overheard from some board members weeks earlier. Frantic phone calls, hushed discussions about expanding development near the forest boundary. The local land was under pressure, the untouched edges shrinking with each new project. Wildlife had nowhere left to go. A knot tightened in Jake's gut. The picnic wasn't just careless. It might be a distraction, a smokescreen to hide bigger plans. The HOA was trying to sweep warnings under the rug to keep property values high. But at what cost? The group reached the clearing near the road. Jake's eyes scanned the woods one last time before he allowed himself a breath. The shadows seemed to pulse with movement, silent watchers lurking just beyond sight. He knew the bears wouldn't leave without a fight. This land was theirs, as much as anyone's. "Everyone, stay together," Jake urged, voice rising to be heard over the nervous whispers. "We need to keep calm until help arrives." A few minutes passed. The distant wail of sirens broke the silence, a relief, but also a sign that the danger wasn't over. As emergency vehicles rolled in, flashing lights flickered against the trees, sending ripples through the forest. But Jake's mind was elsewhere. He bent down, brushing dirt away from the paw prints once more. These bears weren't just visitors. They were displaced, desperate. The consequences of human greed and negligence were written in every scar on his land, and the worst was yet to come. The picnic had barely settled into a nervous silence when the first scream shattered the uneasy calm. "Mommy, look!" A small girl's voice rang out, sharp and terrified. Jake spun toward the source, his heart pounding. Near the edge of the forest, a boy no older than 7 was frozen in place, eyes wide and fixed on the dark shadow slipping silently through the trees. The others hadn't seen it yet, but Jake's gaze followed the movement. A massive, hulking shape, broad shoulders brushing branches, thick fur gleaming faintly in the filtered sunlight. The grizzly was closer than anyone dared imagine. Everyone. "Move, now!" Jake shouted, his voice cutting through the growing panic. The picnic erupted into chaos. Parents grabbed their children, neighbors pushed tables and blankets out of the way, and the grill was abandoned mid-sizzle. The scent of cooked meat, once inviting, now hung heavy and dangerous in the air. Jake's eyes locked on the bears. Slow, deliberate approach. It wasn't alone. Another figure emerged behind the first. A larger, even more intimidating bear, their massive forms unmistakable and terrifying. The crowd scattered, some running toward the road, others slipping into the underbrush in blind desperation. Jake's mind raced. Panic was contagious, but he had to keep his wits. Running blindly would only provoke the animals. He turned sharply, yelling, "Stay calm! Don't run into the woods! Follow me!" A group of neighbors hesitated, caught between the urge to flee and the need to listen. Jake seized their hands, pulling them toward a narrow path he knew well. A hidden trail winding through the thickest part of his property, leading to a rocky outcrop where the bears couldn't easily follow. Branches whipped at his face and his boots slipped on loose soil as he urged the group forward. The bears' guttural growls echoed behind them, a relentless reminder of the danger closing in. "Keep moving," Jake commanded, breath coming fast. "Don't look back!" Suddenly, a low growl rumbled behind him, close and threatening. A branch cracked. Jake glanced over his shoulder just in time to see the second bear break into a lumbering run, its massive paws pounding the earth. His heart slammed against his ribs. Ahead, the rocky outcrop rose sharply. If they could reach it, the group would. "Be safe!" Bears were hesitant to climb steep, jagged terrain. "Almost there," Jake urged, his voice rough but steady. The group scrambled upward, limbs scraping against stone. Behind them, the first bear roared, the sound primal and bone-chilling. Jake reached the top, turning to guide the last of the group over the edge. But the path was narrow, and the terrified neighbors struggled to keep balance. A cry rang out. A woman tripped, falling hard. Jake lunged forward, grabbing her arm just as the second bear closed in, snarling. "Get up! Now!" Jake hissed, pulling her to her feet. The bear hesitated, then let out a frustrated growl, backing away. The moment stretched, taut and fragile. Jake's mind screamed for a solution. Then, with desperate clarity, he grabbed a picnic basket abandoned on the ground, yanking out a large steak still warm from the grill. Holding it aloft, he shouted, "Hey, over here!" The first bear's head snapped toward him, nostrils flaring. Slowly, cautiously, it lumbered over, distracted by the scent. Jake edged backward, tossing the meat away from the group, buying seconds. The bears chased the bait, turning away from the terrified neighbors. Jake exhaled, muscles trembling, but relief was thin and fleeting. The bears weren't going far. They were hungry, and the picnic had been an invitation, one the HOA had unknowingly extended. As the group huddled on the outcrop, Jake scanned the forest line once more. The picnic was meant to be a harmless community gathering, but it had ignited a dangerous confrontation with the wild, a warning that nature was never to be taken lightly, and Jake knew this was just the beginning. The air was thick with tension, heavy as the dense forest surrounding them. Jake's heart hammered in his chest like a war drum as the bears circled below, growls rumbling through the trees like distant thunder. The neighbors, huddled together on the rocky outcrop, clung to each other, wide eyes darting between the looming threat and the narrow path ahead. A scream shattered the uneasy quiet. One of the younger kids slipped and tumbled, a harsh cry cutting through the chaotic symphony of fear. Jake's blood ran cold. "Help me!" The boy's voice cracked. Without hesitation, Jake plunged down the steep slope, sliding over loose stones and tangled roots, his hands reaching for the child just as the second bear took a heavy step forward, powerful paws crushing the earth. "Stay back!" Jake shouted, waving his arms wildly to distract the bear. The beast paused, nostrils flaring, its dark eyes locked on him. "Run!" Jake ordered the neighbors on the outcrop, then turned back to the boy, gripping his arm and pulling him to his feet. The child's small hands trembled against Jake's jacket. Behind him, the bears stirred, agitated and bold. The picnic had unwittingly drawn them into a territory they would fight to protect or reclaim. The forest, once a peaceful backdrop, now felt alive with menace. Branches snapped underfoot, leaves rustled like whispers of an ancient warning, and the scent of blood and fear hung thick in the air. Jake led the group through a narrow crevice in the rocks, a tight passage that offered the only real escape. The path was slippery, roots slick with morning dew, but there was no choice. "Keep moving! Don't stop!" Jake urged, muscles straining with every step. The neighbors followed, some stumbling, others clutching each other desperately. The bears. Growls grew louder, echoing against the canyon walls like a chorus of doom. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed, a fallen tree limb snapping under the weight of one bear's charge. The ground trembled beneath Jake's feet. He glanced back just in time to see the massive animal surge forward, eyes blazing with raw hunger. A mother screamed, shielding her child, frozen with terror. Jake's mind raced. The outcrop was their safe haven, but the path behind was rapidly closing. If they didn't find another way out, the bears would trap them like prey. Spotting a cluster of dense bushes to the right, Jake darted toward them, motioning for the others to follow. The thick foliage swallowed them, masking their scent and muffling their movements. The bears paused, sniffing the air, confusion flickering in their dark eyes. Jake held his breath, heart pounding against his ribs. Minutes felt like hours. Slowly, the neighbors began to relax, breaths coming easier. But the reprieve was temporary. From the thicket, a sudden rustle, a flash of movement, and the second bear crashed toward them with terrifying speed. Jake shouted a warning, grabbing a sturdy branch nearby. The bear barreled forward, teeth bared, muscles rippling beneath thick fur. Jake swung, the branch with all his strength, connecting with a solid thud against the bear's snout. The beast recoiled, snarling but retreating into the shadows. The group scattered deeper into the forest, adrenaline fueling their desperate flight. Jake's lungs burned, arms aching from the effort, but he knew he had to keep going. No one could afford to slow down. As they pushed through the wilderness, the chaos of the picnic faded behind them, replaced by the raw, primal battle for survival. Each step was a gamble, each breath a stolen moment. The wild was unforgiving, and they had trespassed into its heart. Jake glanced back one last time, the dark shapes of the bears melting into the forest's edge. The nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun. The dense forest swallowed the group, branches clawing at their faces, roots tangling their feet. Jake led them deeper, heart pounding with every step. The screams and growls had faded into a haunting silence, but that offered little comfort. They were lost in the wild now, far from safety, far from help. Behind them, the faint echoes of sirens mingled with the rustling of leaves. Emergency crews were nearby, but would they find them in time? "Stay together," Jake barked, glancing back at the shaken faces. "We can't split up." Marcy, the HOA president, her usual composure shattered, clutched her daughter's hand tightly. "Why didn't you warn us earlier, Jake?" she asked, voice trembling. Jake's jaw tightened. "I did. You all ignored the warnings. You brought them here." "No, we didn't know it would be this bad," Marcy snapped, her eyes wide with fear. Jake didn't argue. There was no time. Ahead, the path forked into two shadowed trails. Both vanished into thick undergrowth, uncertain and foreboding. "Which way?" a voice whispered. Jake hesitated, heart thrumming. He hadn't ventured this deep before. His land ended near the picnic spot, but these trails were unmarked, wild beyond anything he'd seen. Suddenly, a sharp crack sounded from the left path, followed by a low growl. The group froze. "It's the bears," Jake said grimly. "We have to take the right." The decision was unanimous, driven by instinct and fear. The group plunged into the darker trail, branches closing behind them like a trap. Minutes stretched into agonizing eternity. The forest around them seemed to breathe, shadows twisting, strange sounds echoing between the trees. Jake's pulse quickened with every snap of a twig, every flutter of wings overhead. Suddenly, they stumbled into a small clearing. The silence was eerie, unnatural. In the center lay a massive, uprooted tree, its roots torn from the earth, a gaping hole beneath. Jake's flashlight caught movement inside. A pair of eyes blinked up at them from the shadows. A bear cub, tiny, frightened, alone. The neighbors gasped. Some moved closer, others held back. Jake's instincts screamed at him. This cub was vulnerable, but its mother was likely close. Don't, he warned sharply. We can't risk it. But before anyone could respond, a deep growl erupted from the tree line. The mother bear burst into view, massive and furious, eyes blazing with protective rage. The group froze as the bear advanced, growling louder, teeth bared. Jake stepped forward, raising his hands. We don't want to hurt you. Just leave us alone. The bear hesitated, nostrils flaring, then slowly retreated, but not without one last warning snarl. Jake exhaled slowly, tension flooding out of him. This encounter changed everything. The bears weren't invaders. They were defenders of their home. And the HOA's careless picnic had shattered a fragile balance. We have to get out, Jake said quietly, before more come. As they turned back toward the road, Jake's mind churned. The neighborhoods. Safety wasn't just threatened by wild animals. It was at risk from their own ignorance. The Grizzlies were a symptom, not the disease, and until the HOA faced that truth, Jake feared more chaos was inevitable. The group moved cautiously, shadows, stretching long as the sun dipped behind the dense canopy. The path back to the road was anything but clear. Every step echoed with the possibility of a sudden growl, a snap of a branch, or worse. Jake kept his eyes scanning the forest line, senses sharpened by hours of fear and adrenaline. He was no stranger to the wilderness, but tonight, the land felt alien, unforgiving. Marcy stumbled beside him, her earlier defiance replaced with quiet desperation. Jake, what do we do now? How do we fix this? Jake's jaw clenched. We start by admitting we made a mistake. The HOA ignored the warnings. They pushed this picnic onto my land without thinking about the consequences. Her eyes flickered. With guilt. I thought it was harmless. Just a community event. But it's more than that, Jake said, voice low but fierce. We've been pushing into the forest for years, building, expanding, cutting down trees. The bears are running out of space. The others listened silently, the weight of his words sinking in. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed through the trees, different from the growls before, deeper, more urgent. The group froze. Jake's gaze snapped to a ridge above them where shadows shifted unnaturally. Two more bears appeared, larger and angrier than the ones before, their eyes glowing in the dusk. They're blocking the way, whispered one of the neighbors, voice trembling. Jake swallowed hard. We need a distraction. Fast! He spotted a cluster of dry branches nearby and grabbed a handful, then noticed an abandoned flare gun lying near a fallen log, probably left from a forest ranger's patrol. An idea sparked. Stay close and be ready to move, Jake commanded, pulling the flare gun into his hands. He aimed toward the bushes opposite the path and fired. The flare hissed through the air, landing with a bright explosion of red light and sparks. The bears growled, startled and confused by the sudden blaze. Taking advantage of their distraction, Jake led the group swiftly down a narrow, less visible trail he had noticed earlier, a faint dirt path worn by wildlife but hidden from the main forest roads. Branches whipped past them as they raced, hearts pounding louder than their footsteps. Behind them, the bears roared in frustration, but did not pursue immediately, wary of the unfamiliar flare. As the group finally broke through the last of the trees, the glow of the neighborhood streetlights shimmered ahead, a beacon of safety. But Jake's relief was tempered by a new dread. The HOA board had ignored the natural world's warnings, but nature was far from done sending its message. At the community center later that night, the emergency meeting was tense and charged with fear. The neighborhood council, led by Marcy, finally faced the truth. The picnic had been a reckless invitation, one that had endangered lives and unleashed chaos. Jake stood quietly in the corner, watching faces pale as the consequences sank in. "This land isn't just ours to use," he said firmly, breaking the silence. "It belongs to the wild, too. If we don't respect that, there will be more encounters, maybe worse than this." Marcy nodded slowly. "We need a plan. No more picnics on Jake's land. No more pushing the boundaries." The room agreed, in somber murmurs. But as Jake stepped outside into the cool night air, a distant howl sliced through the darkness. The bears were still out there, watching, waiting, and the land held secrets far deeper than anyone had imagined. The emergency meeting had ended hours ago, but the weight of the night pressed heavily on Jake. He stayed behind, wandering the dimly lit streets near his property, replaying the events over and over in his mind. Something didn't sit right. The bear's aggressive behavior felt too calculated, almost like a warning, but of what? His gaze drifted toward the dense forest line, shadows twisting in the moonlight. Jake's land had always held mysteries, but now those secrets seemed to stir awake. The next morning, Jake decided to explore a section of his property he rarely visited, a hidden ravine covered by towering pines and thick underbrush. He needed answers. As he stepped beneath the towering trees, the air grew cooler, the forest eerily silent except for the crunch of leaves beneath his boots. Suddenly, he stumbled over something half buried in the earth, brushing away dirt and pine needles. He uncovered a rusted metal box, old and weathered. Curiosity gnawed at him as he pried it open. Inside lay a collection of faded documents, yellowed photographs, and maps, evidence of a long-forgotten logging operation that had scarred this land decades ago. One photo caught his eye. A group of men standing in front of a massive clearing, their faces grim, machinery visible in the background. But more disturbing was a note tucked beneath the papers, written in hurried, almost frantic handwriting. Forest is dying. The bears are restless. If the logging doesn't stop, something worse will come. Jake's heart pounded. The bears weren't just defending territory. They were responding to deeper wounds inflicted on the land. The picnic was a spark in a tinderbox. As he pocketed the documents, a sudden noise froze him, a low growl echoing through the ravine. He turned sharply, eyes scanning the shadows. Two grizzlies emerged, their eyes locking onto him with an intelligence that sent chills down his spine. But instead of attacking, the bears circled slowly, almost as if assessing him. Jake held his ground, heart hammering, but mind clear. For a moment, wild and man seemed to understand each other. A fragile truce, born of respect and shared history. Then the bears retreated into the forest, leaving Jake alone with the chilling realization. The conflict between the neighborhood and the bears was just the surface. Beneath it lay a tangled web of broken promises, environmental damage, and a wilderness fighting back. Jake knew that if the HOA didn't change course, the Grizzlies' warning would turn deadly, and the consequences would ripple far beyond his land. The next HOA meeting was nothing like the others. This time, tension crackled through the crowded room like electricity. Jake stood front and center, the rusted metal box of forgotten documents resting heavily on the table before him. Faces were tight with worry, guilt, and something else. Fear. Marcy, now humbled, looked at Jake with a mixture of respect and remorse. "It's clear we ignored the signs," she said quietly. "We've treated this land like it was just dirt and trees, something to use and forget. But it's a living thing." Jake nodded, his voice steady but firm. "The bears are a symptom, not..." The problem. Logging, expansion, neglect. It's all part of a chain. If we don't change how we treat this place, there won't just be grizzly encounters. There will be devastation. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Suddenly, a sharp knock at the door startled everyone. The sheriff stepped inside, holding a phone. "Emergency dispatch just reported something near the far edge of Jake's property," he said grimly. "A disturbance? Large animal activity. Locals are reporting strange tracks, broken fences." Jake's stomach tightened. The bears? Maybe, but there's more. Curiosity and dread mingled in the room. Jake and a few volunteers quickly organized a search party, setting out with flashlights and tools. The night was cold, the forest alive with eerie sounds. When they reached the far edge, the sight that met them was surreal. A massive, freshly dug pit gaped in the earth, surrounded by claw marks not just from bears, but something else. The earth was churned as if by a force beyond nature. Nearby, a collapsed shack lay in ruins, an old hunter's cabin, long abandoned. Jake shone his flashlight inside, revealing a hidden trap, primitive yet brutal, designed not for game, but for something much larger. And there, scrawled on a torn piece of cloth, was a chilling message. "Leave the bears alone, or pay the price." The group exchanged uneasy glances. It wasn't just wildlife reacting. It was someone, or something, protecting the land with deadly intent. As Jake stared into the dark woods, the bears' growls echoed once more, a warning that the fragile balance was now a battleground. The HOA finally understood. Nature's fury wasn't random, it was a reckoning. The picnic on Jake's land wasn't just a mistake. It was a catalyst, a spark, lighting a fire that could not be easily extinguished. But amidst the danger, there was hope. The community agreed to new rules, strict limits on expansion, preservation efforts, and respect for the wild neighbors they had ignored for too long. Jake became an unexpected leader, bridging the gap between human and wilderness. And late at night, when the forest was silent but watchful, he often thought of the bears, not as monsters, but as guardians of a land that demanded respect. The last stand had passed, but the story was far from over. Because in the wild, every choice mattered, and every action echoed for generations to come.